I'm Justin Marshall. I've got a background in craft and digital making, so I'm quite interested in combining traditional making processes with digital making processes using computer-controlled equipment, and I'm leading the hiCraft project.
And I'm Phil Heslop. My background is in computing science, so in coding and that kind of area. But my career has kind of gone through HCI, human-computer interaction, and I suppose the title I would choose now would be a creative technologist.
The project we're talking about that involves both me, Phil, and John Rogers came out of our early thinking around lost and found.
I started to wonder around, why do we always have to know the absolute? Can we not just know how to find something by showing us the direction to go in, for example, rather than its absolute position? Because for 99% of the of things that you do, you probably don't need to know the absolute location. You want to know your phone's over there. And you could introduce things like, is it close, is it far away? But actually, if you just show something relative, an arrow, if you are moving and it's accurate, if it's moving when you're moving, then it's close. If it's not moving when you're moving, then it's probably further away, so that you can start to put in your own interpretation into that. And I guess deconstructing what it means to be able to be lost as a constructive feature, not a bug, something that we might and often choose to do, than necessarily always be found.
And John, you said right at the start of the project, when you were introducing this concept, that it's like they're producing their own private version of the internet that they have full control over because they don't want anyone else to be able to get at the value that they're getting out of this kind of system.
I don't know the exact innovation process at Apple, but essentially by Apple wanting you to find your lost phone or your laptop, they created this sort of network that would ping, and so you could see where your thing was. And then they suddenly realized, I guess at a meeting, maybe with Post-it notes, maybe not, someone around the table went, hey, instead of find my phone, why can't we find anything? And you could sort of imagine a version of Steve Jobs on the stage going, we have converted Find My Phone into Find My Anything, and this is what they do, because they realized all they needed was a Bluetooth connection that connected to any of the phones or computers or other Apple devices that are broadcasting and connected to the internet. If they can just scrape into their Bluetooth, they can use all the tech that's on there, the GPS, the location technology, the fact that the IP address of the computer you're on will tell your location. If it's a phone, obviously it's going to have GPS. So a kind of very parasitical device, which doesn't need very much, except for the ability to ping Bluetooth back and forth every now and again.
We move from there to thinking about compasses and what compasses do in a very simple way. They use natural magnetism to orientate ourselves in the world, and we've all kind of used a simple compass at some point, but also there's histories in lodestones, which were kind of natural magnetized material which had kind of seemingly magical properties. So there's something kind of mysterious and intriguing in history about the idea of a magnet and the idea of it just pointing to something seemingly without any external forces. So that was our kind of talking around that subject, and then starting to think about contrasting that idea of a kind of knowing the direction you're in rather than the exact positions people are, to considering ideas to do with the way in which people use location services now, with connected things like phones being the obvious. So one of the things we were kind of referencing in the design, but also the interaction, was the idea of the actual Qibla, which is the device that's been used historically for Muslims to find out the direction of Mecca, so they can point towards Mecca in prayer. So that's all it does. It doesn't do any more than that. It's a really one function object, but has a real history in very ornate kind of design work associated with producing something that had a real spiritual meaning for the people. So it's those kind of devices we were interested in referencing, in thinking about our digital compasses.
So what we wanted then was to formulate some kind of a compass-like device that would allow people to interact with each other by knowing what direction that person was in. So each person would have one of these devices, and when it was activated, the arrow would point towards them, and then you can choose what to do with that information, whether you want to walk towards the other person or away from them. In order to make that happen inside these devices, there is an arrow which is what is going to be pointing to the other person, and this arrow is using the theme of magnetism, is only visible when you shake it so that you can see the iron filings sticking to the magnetic arrow. This is on a small servo motor which is able to be set at any particular angle once we've calculated that angle, and there's also a Bluetooth chip inside here which connects to something which will give us our location in order to do the calculation. So while you're interacting with the compass and shaking it, it's transmitting that shake to your other partner's compass saying, I'm ready to interact, and it is using the maths I talked about to calculate what the angle is for the arrow to point to. And then, as I said, if you want to walk towards that person, you can, but if you don't have to. You can avoid people. So the interaction is not prescribed by the technology. All the technology is doing is giving you one piece of information. Yeah. So the reality is that in order for that kind of thing to work, you would need to be able to control quite a large infrastructure of location services that actually find out where people are in the real world and make sure that you had full control over that and didn't share any of that with a third party. So rather than make that a complete full stop on the project, we decided to incorporate part of the existing technology which we're kind of railing against, but was necessary to make sure that our concept worked. So we used a mobile phone alongside the device, which provides some of the services which you can't manufacture yourself. So this includes a GPS chip and finds out your location. It sends that information to the device, so you can put this phone in your backpack or somewhere else. You're not interacting with the phone, but it is providing that extra piece of the jigsaw in order to allow the compass to function as far as the user is concerned in the way that which we're advocating. One of the things that often comes up is what is the difference between kind of academic research for this kind of technology and the research that might be carried out by big technology companies like Google or Samsung or Sony or somebody like that. And the main thing is that we don't have anything like the scale that we can employ. So if you were going to go into industry, you would do this kind of project with a team of like 20 or 30 developers, and it would take 4 or 5 years to come up with something, but it would always be geared towards like, is there a product at the end that can be mass produced and sold? We're taking a different kind of approach where we only have 1 or 2 or 3 people involved in designing and developing the compass, and that necessitates some shortcuts, like we already described about using the existing phone technology. We couldn't replicate that, but it does allow us more freedom in how and the way that we present the artifacts, and how the interaction is completely tailored to exactly what we want for our academic goals rather than this kind of product goals.
Yeah. There is an inherent tension in what we have to do. But I think it's a combination of a pragmatic approach in order to make something happen, so we can really test an experience of using things rather than being entirely fictional devices of going, you imagine if it did this, this and this. These things will point to each other,
yeah.
and we can therefore get a real sense of what that interaction might be. And actually we are still exploring what actually that might mean when we're out in the world with them.
And there's so many reasons. I mean, I think the simplest thing is, for me, a compass feels human, a GPS feels a machine, and the point of hiCraft as well was to engage with the humanities in the broadest sense. And I do feel that GPS is a conduit to conversations around technology, and a compass is a conduit for conversations around people.
So what you've got to also remember about normal phone-based location services is that they present themselves as being extremely accurate and placing you in a specific location. However, a lot of that is kind of smoke and mirrors, because what they're doing is they're taking some algorithm to understand the kind of journey you're making and basically snapping your location to a more likely point. So if you're, for example, following a road north, but your GPS is actually telling your phone that you are going east, the algorithm will understand that the road is only going north, so you can't really have been going east, so it will snap you back to that road, and then later on the GPS will catch up and it will give you a more accurate position. And this is great if you're doing something based on a map which has roads and paths on it. However, if you go somewhere like the Lake District and you're trying to use Google Maps as a way of finding your way, it's not very good, because it will snap you to roads, and the roads aren't where you are. You're on top of a mountain. Yeah. And in fact, they even have signs up in the Lake District saying, do not use Google Maps to find your way around the lakes. You need to use a physical map or some other way. Yeah. Because of this issue, it's snapping your location to a more likely place, which might be a mile away from where you actually are.
Yeah. And what I'm most interested in is thinking about the forms in terms of their physical presence, their tactility, their visual kind of messaging, in order to I guess communicate these kind of crafty, distinct experience. There is always different, and it's something Phil's probably can talk to a bit more. There are phases in these processes between thinking about design, thinking about sort of engineering, kind of instrumental aspects, and then there's a sort of craft space where you're really trying to think about the poetics of the experience a little bit more, and the way in which those move in and out of your entire production making process. I think that's what happens, and the emphasis that you play at different places. So some places very functional, other places much more exploratory. So the hand carved kind of aesthetic of this piece, which was created using the same sort of techniques as when I make spoons. So it's using a hand axe to create these kind of faceted structures or football surfaces. So you can just literally chopping away at your piece, and then finishing off using the sort of tools you'd use to finish off a spoon with more accuracy of just kind of finishing these things. So you're playing around with processes that create a unique one-off form to something that creates repeatability, which kind of is part of our kind of discussion around connected things. What's the value of bespokeness compared to universality? What's the value of variability compared to uniformity? So that was the sort of aesthetic space I was playing around with the actual form of these compasses.
I think there are iconic objects that help ground the internet, or or facets, so that from an object perspective, the compass, but from the facet, the location services. And I think we need to put a little bit of friction in front of people to get them to really interpret that, and to know what that means, to know when this is a good thing and when it's actually not a good thing, or it's a good thing that needs to be questioned. You know, like so many aspects of our lives that we can question around, you know, our engagement with them, and to be able to have some kind of sense of control over that. And what worries me is what we have we've all drunk from the the big tech, you know, kind of Kool-Aid. Actually, it's a Kool-Aid where we can't choose to have any other flavor other than Kool-Aid, and I want to be able to offer other things. Like, why can't you say, yes, I want this, but not all of it? I really would like to go down into knowing the direction of someone without knowing where they are, and having that builds a trust, a human trust, because it leaves ambiguity for us to then use our human skills to negotiate the final piece of that contract, without having to have an all-powerful machine doing it in the same way for anyone, anywhere, all at once in the world.